Someone asked on Reddit, what was the moment at a wedding when you said this marriage won't last long? Which story do you think is the most interesting? Let's meet in the comments after the video. Story 1.
I told my fiancé that there were very few things I really cared about my wedding. One of these was non-negotiable. I didn't want to smash cake in each other's faces. I didn't think it was entertaining or funny. I thought it was rude and didn't want to risk my makeup or dress. I'm not a high-maintenance person, and I'm not a very opinionated person, so it must mean a lot to him that I feel so strongly about this. It was one of 3 requests I made for a wedding. The other 2 were garters and no pickup line. Now it was time to give cake to each other, and we both acted civilly and did not split the cake. Perfect. Shortly after, I had to go to the toilet, and on the way back, he and I stopped to get an actual slice of cake instead of the 1 bite we had eaten, and he smashed the cake in my face. At that moment, I questioned whether I had made a big mistake. At that moment, I was shocked, deeply embarrassed, and really angry. Especially when he laughed and told me I had a creamy Hitler mustache. I wasn't laughing. I was truly heartbroken. I had done my best for him and his family, fulfilling all his wishes, and even changing our wedding date because he requested it a week in advance due to his family's travel needs. But he couldn't even fulfill my single request about how he should treat me on our wedding day. At that moment, I realized he didn't actually care about me or my feelings, and he didn't respect my wants and needs. I can't say I thought our marriage would last long because he smashed cake in my face, but maybe that was the first time I really understood he wasn't taking care of me or treating me like he should. I really thought, maybe I should just walk out the door and not look back. Years later, our struggling marriage ended after a period of emotional and verbal abuse. Looking back at our relationship before marriage, there were a few red flag moments when I should have broken up with him. But I often think back to that moment on our wedding day and mentally yell at that girl to run away. It didn't feel right at all at the time. It wasn't just discomfort or disappointment. In that moment, I felt genuinely disturbed by what he did because it contradicted what he said about his love for me. I should have listened to that bad feeling in my stomach. I should have realized I was making a mistake.
Story 2.
The groom's hilarious wedding speech was basically a 10-minute rant about how much he didn't like his wife. The guy literally stood there on his wedding day and said, "Marriage is terrible and my wife is annoying." And 4 months later, they got divorced. Turns out that publicly belittling your partner in front of their entire family isn't a great way to ensure the longevity of a relationship. Who knew?
Story 3.
The priest had to continue the wedding when he called the hungover bride and groom into the back room and said that he had never seen 2 people so interested in the wedding in a church full of people. As soon as the vows were exchanged, the bridesmaids took the bride outside and made her vomit on the church steps. We thought wrong. They have been married for 15 years in a completely incompatible way. When asked how she is doing, the bride says that the groom loves her as much as she does.
Story 4.
Sometimes I tend bar at weddings. 2 stands out to me, where the bride spent the whole reception waiting for her new husband to show up, dance, and enjoy the party. Meanwhile, her husband was in another room watching football. When she realized what he was doing, she shouted, "Where that irresponsible guy I just married? I'm gonna get him." She kept yelling. The other wedding was one where, after the ceremony, the groom got shy and spent the entire reception keeping his distance from his new wife.
Story 5.
The groom was an incurable womanizer and was dating more than 1 girl at a time. One of them wanted to marry him so badly, so she accidentally missed her birth control and trapped the groom's baby. They eventually divorced after 20 years, but remained married surprisingly longer than people expected. But those long times were definitely not good times. I guarantee you, because the groom was my uncle.
Story 6.
The bride refused to sign the marriage certificate until the new groom agreed to a series of concessions. The groom refused. Good for him. So officially, from the state's perspective, they never got married, even though we were at the ceremony. They made the house they bought together a very sensitive issue.
Story 7.
I saw the groom flirting with a girl at the after party. The bride saw this and was disturbed, but acted like she was fine. I know you've swallowed most of that bullshit already.
Story 8.
During the speak now or forever hold your peace part, the bride's ex-boyfriend appeared to object. We're talking about weirdness, right?
Story 9.
When the best man's toast includes betting odds on how long the marriage will last, and an actual betting pool is circulated during the reception, We're talking about a lack of faith. And the worst part, the groom laughed the loudest. Amazingly, if you can believe it, they are still together after 7 years. Maybe it was a strange sense of optimism rather than a lack of faith.
Story 10.
Years ago, I was at a wedding for an old friend of mine in Berlin. Since we lived in different cities and hadn't seen each other in a while, we didn't really know the bride. It was a simple event attended by a lot of bohemian artists. The party at their place that night was wild. Drinks were flowing from everywhere, with people in all sorts of states. At some point, there was a joke about the bride and groom, and they were handcuffed together. The person who put the handcuffs on was being ridiculous and had cuffed the groom way too tightly, cutting off his circulation. At first, everyone laughed when the joker refused to show the key. But when the groom's hand started to turn purple and he was in pain, someone finally convinced the joker to give him the only key. The bride took the key, put it on her side of the cuffs, and broke it in half. Now, there was no way to get the groom's cuffs off, and he was really in pain and distress. I found a bobby pin in the bathroom and used it as a makeshift lockpick, and finally managed to get him out of that thing. A few years later, they got divorced. But at that moment, I realized this wasn't going to last long.
Story 11.
We were at the wedding of one of my wife's coworkers, and after the ceremony, they took some photos outside the hotel. I was picking up some weird vibes from the groom. He didn't seem very interested in his new wife or his family and just wanted to hang out with the staff and his old teammates. I jokingly said I'd bet it wouldn't last more than 3 years. When I said that, my wife and her friends got really upset and insisted that his big day should be filled with love and happiness. About 2 years later, he was putting physical and verbal pressure on her, and she ended up leaving him because he cheated on her with another girl. I can't say I didn't enjoy reminding them of that.
Story 12.
I'm a pretty relaxed woman, and I have an open-door policy for guests. But when my new husband invited a good female friend to stay with us on our wedding night, after a big wedding party, I got really annoyed. When I told him it wasn't appropriate for him to ask us and that saying yes went against my wishes, he didn't listen. We were in our 30s, not students, and he was making good money. But he was always eager to save, so he hadn't booked a hotel room, probably hoping to exploit us in some way. So that night, he asked if we could take her home and let her sleep on our couch. We were in a big city, and even at that hour, she could have found a room somewhere. He seemed more interested in pleasing her than listening to me. Like I said, it was our wedding night. It was a pattern. Once I signed the paper, my wishes were ignored. I should have been smart and left right then, but it just got worse from there.
Story 13.
Oh, this is a kind of deception because they continued in a way. But my uncle married this manipulative and bad-natured woman. My uncle wanted to marry her legally and in a church, so things started off on the wrong foot. But they only got legally married because she didn't want to. She wore a tight, short dress that looked more like a party dress than a wedding gown. Throughout the ceremony, she seemed like she was smelling bad, and then they said, "We're expecting." Even though I was 13 and still quite innocent, I knew that the only reason for their marriage was that. A child is born, and things go badly. The manipulative wife becomes a bad mother, mentally pressuring her 2-3-year-old son by telling him monsters would eat him and scream at him. And let's not even talk about the beatings. Years later, when we visited my grandmother, my little sister and I were babysitting, and for a while I stepped away. This woman started fixing my sister's hair and told her she really wanted a girl, right in front of her son. The breaking point was when she said that this mental case would pressure her to leave home as soon as possible. Eventually, my uncle divorced her and met this wonderful woman. They fell in love and got married, and the difference was incredible. She wore a big, beautiful princess gown. When she lifted the hem, she looked like a little girl. She was so excited, and they both shone with joy to the point of being contagious.
Story 14.
I used to be a wedding planner. This story isn't about the couple, but about the bride's parents. The bride and her fiancé weren't religious, but her parents were very devout. My mom wanted them to have a secular ceremony, so they arranged a meeting for me to talk with the parents. The father was an older, worn-out farmer in overalls, and the mother was dressed beautifully. She came ready to present her case. I told her that I was working for the couple, not for her, so we needed to discuss whether she wanted to continue funding the event. If not, they needed to inform the couple couple. The father said, "She's my only daughter. Of course we're paying for her wedding." The mother screamed that she wouldn't pay for a wedding that disrespected her faith. I'm not joking. The farmer stood up, took off his hat, banged it on the table, and began to cry. He said, "Betty, I don't even know who you are anymore. If you're this ugly inside, I don't want to be with you." Then he walked out. After a few minutes of silence, I told the woman I was ending the meeting and suggested she make a decision regarding the money. My dad ended up financing the whole wedding, and they got divorced. The couple is still happily married. My mom was frowning throughout the entire ceremony, and I'm quite sure the couple was worried she'd make a scene. The bride's mother ruined her marriage of over 30 years because she wouldn't fund her daughter's secular wedding.
If you have a story you would like to share, please share it with us in the comments. Also, subscribe to my channel for more Reddit stories like this, and don't forget to turn on notifications. Take care, friends.